Welcome back to week 7 of our winter series, We the People, where we are redefining who we are as the church. This week, we're going to be taught by Tom Goodlett. He is going to walk us through how we can priest daily. Let's receive today.
Hello, family. I have a question for you, and that is simply this. What's wrong with candles? All right, they're all over my house, let me tell you that. My wife gets these like every birthday and Christmas, and they're all scented and, you know, making smells around the house. And that's nice. I mean, that's okay, but there's kind of a downside to candles. And that is that candles, well, they only get used once. Once they're done, they're done. If they burn down, they burn out. I mean, there's really nothing sadder or uglier than that little melted candle trying to hold on, you know, with a flame and do that. And so candles are nice and they provide light, but they're limited. They're limited in the length of light that they can produce. Now contrast that maybe with one of these. A lantern. Now you don't see these too much anymore, maybe at a Cracker Barrel or something like that. But the nice thing about this is an oil-based lantern. And so it's got a wick and it can be continually used to light a room, to light a place, as long as you keep refilling it with oil. And so you can get a lot more use out of a lantern, but that lantern has got to be refilled. And so candles burn out, and we got to be careful of burnout because we've been learning, of course, about, well, we the people, we are priests. We've been learning how we're priests. We've been learning the functions of priesting. And really the question is, okay, we understand we're priests. We understand there's functions for us to do them. How do we continually do them daily? How do we priest daily? And we know from the scriptures, like in Hebrews 10, the author of Hebrews tells us that the priests, well, they did their priestly functions daily. And they kept it going. But the problem that the writer of Hebrews tells us is they kept doing this daily, that at some point it became kind of a routine. It became more ritualistic. It became limited. It's as if their light slowly burnt out. And they were priests without a flame. And what the writer of Hebrews says, well, Jesus has those expectations of us to priest and to priest daily, but he kind of changes the whole game with the whole flame. So how do we priest daily in the name of Jesus without ever burning out? Well, we have to go from a candle mentality to more of a lantern mentality. You see, the lantern needs to be refilled. And so one of the things we know, if we go back to the original assignments of the priest, if we go back to Exodus chapter 27, God tells Moses to tell Aaron and his sons that the priestly functions will involve keeping light within the tabernacle. And the ways they're going to keep light within the tabernacle as they can do the functions of their priesting, they're going to use a lampstand. And that lampstand is not a candle-based lampstand. It's an oil-based lampstand. And they are to continually refill the oil so the lampstand can continually be used and continually give light, and they can continue to priest. In fact, in chapter 27 of Exodus, we get this idea that Aaron and his sons, they would refill the oil to keep the candle lit, keep the flame lit, and they would do this in the evening and in the morning. Now, I just want a little sidebar here. Something I just think is cool throughout the Hebrew scriptures is how the Hebrews would look at a day. The days always started, you can see this in the creation story and throughout, it would start that there was evening and then there was morning. The idea that the daytime really for the Hebrews, or their days started not in the daytime, but kind of in the evening when things were dark. But it always ended with things getting brighter. So there was this running theme through the instructions of the Old Testament that, and maybe you kind of experienced it today, where maybe you're sitting in your group and maybe you've had one of those days where, you're kind of feeling like it's one of those dark moments. But the theme without the Hebrew Scriptures is that, don't worry, keep holding on, it'll get brighter. Yeah. And so we know that they were to keep having this lantern and keep refilling the lantern. So if we're called to priests, and we've been given functions of a priest, how do we keep from burning out, which can so easily happen when we're doing ministry, when we're ministering to the Lord and to God's people? How do we continually refill and become that lantern where we can be continually and daily used by God? Well, I want to give you a couple truths that I think will keep us getting filled and refilled. All right, so, or you could just think of it this way. This will keep us lit. There you go. You try that. All right. But the idea, how do we stay lit? As a candle, as a lampstand. Now I'm losing it. As a lampstand for God, how do we keep the flame going? Here we go. So there's something I learned early on in ministry. In fact, it was really early on in ministry. It was between the summer of my freshman year of college and my sophomore year of college. And somehow I landed this part-time job at this little church in Newport News, Virginia. And they had enough money in their budget to hire a part-time youth pastor for part of the year. 2 months out of the year to be specific, all right? That was like their budget. So somehow I had this job where I'm a part-time youth pastor for part of the year for the summer. I kind of inherited this youth group. The interesting thing is my birthday is in late May, and so I started in early May. So I was 18 years old, and I had 18-year-olds in my youth group, which was just interesting in itself. And so I thought, well, I've only got a limited amount of time. I've got 2 months to kind of pour into these teenagers. What do I do with this time? The time is precious. What do I do? Do we walk through the Bible in a summer? Do we learn the fundamentals of faith? And I remember just wrestling with this. What do I do with this time I have, which isn't a lot? And I remember having a conversation actually with my mother, and she asked me a question. She said, when were you most on fire when you were in high school? When were you most on fire for the Lord when you were in high school? And the answer came to me pretty quickly. It was a time in my high school tenure there where I was inviting friends to the youth group that I was a part of. I was inviting them to church. And when it was exciting for one to invite them to church, didn't know what they'd say yes. Then all of a sudden they're discovering this whole Jesus thing, this whole Bible thing, and then they'd start asking me questions. A lot of questions that I really didn't know the answers. So I had to go meet with the Lord. I had to open up my Bible and I had to find answers. And all of a sudden, as they're asking me questions, I'm finding new truths. I'm on fire for my faith. I'm getting excited. My friends are following Jesus, and that kind of lights me up. And so I was most on fire in my faith when I was inviting friends to church. You see, the thing I learned early on in ministry is that you are fed more when you are feeding. We're fed more when we're feeding. And so there's this interesting passage, and we've already in this series, we've kind of talked about it, dug into it. I want to dig into it a little further. And it's 1 Peter chapter 2, when he talks about this whole identity that we are priests. But there's this whole cause and effect that happens throughout these verses. For one, if we embrace the priesthood, and place ourselves in a position of feeding, which is in essence embracing the priesthood, there's a cause and effect. One of the effects, it says, is that we as priests will experience the light of Christ. We'll experience Christ. We'll experience Him in new ways. And the more we experience Christ, the more opportunity there is for us to experience intimacy with Christ. Now, so if we put ourselves in a position where we're feeding and we're priesting daily, then we have the opportunity to experience Jesus and experience intimacy. And then the passage goes on to explain even more effect. You see, whenever there's intimacy naturally bears fruit. All right? I've been married for going on 18 years, and my wife and I have had intimate moments, and we got 3 kids. All right? You know, intimacy, you know what I'm talking about. It bears fruit. There's fruit to show for intimacy, and it's the same in our relationship with Jesus. So here, if we put ourselves in this priesthood, embrace that priesthood, put ourselves in this situation, position where we're feeding, we get to have new experiences with Christ that cause intimacy, which bear fruit. And the scriptures tell us about some of that fruit. For one, it says that light of Christ spreads to other people. You got more lit people around you, all right? You know, when you're in the priesting. So all of a sudden, you're surrounded by other people who have Jesus in them. So that's one. It creates more people who have the light within them. The other thing it tells us is that it gives us new revelation. We get to have this new understanding about God. It says that once you had no idea what it was like to be part of the family of God, now you're learning what that means. Once you had no idea what it meant to have mercy, receive mercy, and now you know exactly what that is. That as we have this intimacy with God, that there is this effect, that it bears fruit. And so we get new information and we get new people in our lives. And so I just want to ask you, if you're going to stay refilled, have you placed yourself in a position of feeding? Have you placed yourself in a position of feeding? And if not, maybe it's time to just simply do that, to put yourself in a position of feeding so you can be fed. I still learned that when I'm feeding, I'm often fed. Still, even in ministry, even when I'm preaching, when I'm trying to do the work of God, it still drives me back to the Scriptures. I need an explanation for that question, or I need answers, I need guidance. And yes, I'm filled when I spend that time with God and get that new revelation or new knowledge from God, and it fills me. It also makes me pretty excited. I love to learn so I can go teach, and there's a purpose in that. But here's something else I've learned, maybe even more in the last couple of years. In fact, I heard author Bob Goff talk about this one time. And he said, there's a lot of people who learn from spending time, intimate time with God. And that definitely happens, that it happens for him. He said, he realized that God had wired him to actually be a very relational person. And sometimes he gets even more messages from God, from God's people, because that seems to speak his language. And I remember hearing him say, I'm like, that's me. That's me. Do I gain a lot of wisdom when I spend time with God? Yeah, but I get even a lot more when I hang out with lit people. I mean, I hang out, with people who are shining bright, and they're learning things as Jesus is, teaching them and revealing things to them. And so I'm wired that way too. And so a lot of times I'll walk away with a ton of wisdom from the byproduct of hanging out with God's people. And the more God's people, the more I tend to learn and hear from God. In fact, it takes people. If there's something that I could give you in addition to being fed, feeding, place yourself in that feeding that could help refill you, it's an understanding that it takes a priesthood to pull it off. Even when Peter's explaining it to us, he says it's a priesthood. You are a priesthood. You are part of a larger group of priests. And even then, even when Moses is instructing Aaron, he's just not instructing Aaron alone. It says Aaron and his sons. And later on, the Levites. It's always a group of priests priesting together in order to pull it all off. Now, I remember when, I won't give away which son it was, but one of my sons was going into kindergarten, and it was just a season where he was struggling. He didn't want to go into kindergarten. He didn't want to go into school. Each day was tough. My wife and I were just trying everything we could think of to get him to just go to kindergarten and be okay with that. And I remember one day, I think it was even like the second week of school. And again, I pull up to the car line. There's the principal waiting for me because she's going to help me get my son out of the car and into kindergarten. And so we get him out of the car, and I start to drive away, and I see in my rearview mirror my son playing dead on the ground, holding the principal's hand. I think the strategy was maybe if they think I'm dead, I don't have to go to kindergarten. But I could just see this in my rear view. All the other kids are walking in just fine with their backpacks. My kid's dead. And so I could have drove home, but I just went through the car circle, pulled into the school parking lot, went to the main office, and took a seat in the principal's office. I waited about 15 minutes. They eventually got my son to class, and the principal walked in the office. And when she saw me sitting there, she had this look of like terror on her face, thinking, here's one of those parents who's about to rip into me because their son is behaving in a way they don't like. And I quickly told the principal, I said, hey, you need to know that we know we have a strong-willed child, but we're strong-willed parents. What can we do? What can we do to help you? It's something I've been learning, and especially through parenting, is that it's real easy when your kid's misbehaving to look for who to blame. To blame, it's the coach's fault, it's the youth pastor's fault, it's the teacher's fault, it's the principal's fault, when really it's our opportune time to build our team. Because that's what it's going to take to raise our kids. That's what it's going to take to do the things we've been called to do according to our identity. And so, we built our team that day. We came up with new ideas, and they made it through kindergarten. But really, we're in that same sort of situation with priesting. I'm also, I get to work on church, but I also own a couple businesses, and I've learned something in business that a lot of times you can start planning out, how you want to get from point A to point G, okay? A lot of times we spend a lot of time figuring out how do we get there. But there's a better question to ask, and I found that is asking who gets me there. You see, who is stronger than how? A lot of times we aren't doing what we want to do because we're thinking it's us and this is the 5 steps to do it, and we just don't want to do those 5 steps. But what if we could find the who are already can't wait to do those 5 steps, wish you'd always ask them to be a part of this, and now they're excited, and that who gets us there. So I'm learning over and over, it's not how do you get there, it's who gets you there. Yeah. And so my question for you is, who can pour into you? Who can you pour into you? It's time to build your team. Remember, it takes all of us to pull this off. In fact, often it takes light to produce more light. All right, if I'm going to light a fire in my fire pit, in my backyard, I'm going to start with some form of light somewhere. I'm going to start with a match, or I'm going to start with a lighter. And a lot of times I place that lighter where I can find it some other time when it was light. Okay, often light begets more light. And so the bigger the team we link up with, the more we work together and priest together, the more light is available and the more easy it is to be refilled. One more thing I want to share with you to keep you refilled. A truth I hope you understand that I think will help you stay filling up so you can priest daily. And that is the fuel that went into the lantern to keep it lit. It was olive oil. Now, olive oil came from olives that were pressed, that were strained, that were stressed in order to produce the oil. And then that kept it fueling and kept the light going. And maybe for some of you're watching this and you're going, okay, Tom, that sounds like a lot of work, what you're talking about. Not only have we learned that I'm a priest, I have these functions and responsibilities, but now you're asking me to live them out daily, and that just seems like a lot of work. And right now, my life's pretty broken. I feel pretty stressed. I feel pretty strained. I've been pressed by life, and I don't know how much more I can give. I don't even know if I can function. I feel broken. This is the third truth I want you to walk away with today, and that is that broken is still usable by God. In fact, it's often the best place for us to be. In fact, Peter continues in his instruction to us later on in chapter 5 of 1 Peter, and he tells us to go ahead and humble ourselves if we're going to be used by God. Humble ourselves before the Lord and let Him raise us up. And then he goes on and says, and go ahead and cast any burdens you have onto Him. I remember one time when Griffin Gilstrap was talking about this verse, and he said, it's casting. It's this whole idea. It's not just like a lot of times we're like, lay your burden down at Jesus' feet. He's like, just take it off you and throw it. Throw it on over to Him. Like, get it off of you and onto Him. Because He invites that because He cares for us. Because at the end of the day, it's His power, not ours, that allows us to priest daily, that continually fuels us. And so broken is totally usable. So let me just ask you, what weaknesses or burdens do you need to just give or cast onto Him today? It's usable. It's usable, and when we know that, it can keep us fueled. You see, if you sense burnout coming, if you sense, that you're already getting worn out or you can kind of feel it in ministry, well, then it's time to go from that candle mentality to a lantern mentality and be refilled. And that might look like placing yourself in a situation, a position of feeding so that you can be fed. It probably looks like building up a team around you and maybe even the group you're in so that you can priest together and help keep each other refueled. And it means bringing whatever brokenness you have because it's usable and God can use that only to fuel it farther. So whatever you got to do, whether it's being in that position, building that team, or bringing your brokenness, today's the day. Today's the day to take that next step so that you can be the priest that Christ called you to be, and you can be that priest daily.